Ethan had never been the type of man to linger in places where shadows clung thick in the air, but that evening he found himself at the far edge of the flea market, where stalls were nothing more than patched tents and old wooden crates. He had come searching for spare tools, anything cheap enough to keep his aging truck alive for another month, because as a single father raising 7-year-old Noah, money was always tight and sacrifices were constant. As he moved past vendors shouting prices and children weaving between legs, a faint, muffled sound caught his attention. It wasn't the usual market noise of haggling or laughter, it was the trembling sob of a child. Ethan paused, his instincts flaring, and followed the sound through a narrow gap between two stalls. There, half hidden in the dim glow of a lantern, he saw a woman with sharp, cruel features standing over two little girls. The twins were huddled together, their clothes torn, their hair matted, their faces pale with fear. They couldn't have been older than 6. Ethan's chest tightened when he realized the woman wasn't comforting them, she was bargaining with a group of rough-looking men, her voice sharp as she named a price like she was selling livestock. One of the men laughed coldly, another examined the girls with greedy eyes, and Ethan's blood boiled. He stepped forward without thinking, his voice firm as he demanded to know what was happening. The woman sneered, unfazed, and spat out the truth, that the girls were her stepdaughters, a useless burden, as she called them, and she was selling them off to the highest bidder. Ethan's stomach churned, disbelief mixing with rage, because he couldn't comprehend such cruelty. The twins clung tighter to each other, their silent pleas written in their wide, tearful eyes. For a moment, the world blurred around Ethan, the noise of the market drowned by the pounding of his heart. He had lived through grief, raising Noah alone after his wife's death, and he knew the depths of loss and loneliness, but what he saw now was something far darker. Without hesitation, he pulled the small envelope of cash from his pocket, money he had been saving for the truck's repairs, and thrust it toward the woman. "I'll take them," he said with quiet steel in his voice. Greed flashed across her eyes as she snatched the money, and with a dismissive wave, she shoved the girls forward as though ridding herself of trash. Ethan crouched to their level, gently holding their trembling hands, whispering softly, "You're safe now, nobody will hurt you again." The girls didn't answer, but they leaned into him with desperate trust, their fragile bodies clinging to his presence like a lifeline. As Ethan led them away from the dark corner of the market, his mind raced with uncertainty about what he had just done. He didn't know their names, their past, or what future lay ahead, but one truth burned clear in his heart. He had saved them from a nightmare, and even if it meant carrying a burden heavier than he had ever imagined, he would protect them with everything he had. When Ethan brought the two fragile girls home that night, the small house that had always echoed with only his and Noah's voices suddenly felt fuller, heavier with the weight of their silence and fear. Noah, curious and wide-eyed, peeked from behind the kitchen doorway as his father gently guided the twins inside, their tiny hands clutching the edges of his worn jacket as if letting go would plunge them back into darkness. "It's okay, buddy," Ethan reassured his son softly, "these girls will stay with us for now." Noah, though only 7, had his father's quiet strength and nodded eagerly, offering one of his toy trucks as a peace gesture, but the twins, too timid and withdrawn, only pressed closer to Ethan. He didn't push them, instead, he set a pot of soup on the stove, filling the house with the comforting scent of garlic and broth. When he placed steaming bowls before them, the girls hesitated, as if unsure if they were allowed to eat, until Ethan smiled gently and said, "Go on, it's yours." What happened next nearly broke him, the way they devoured the soup hungrily, as if it was the first real meal they had tasted in days, made his chest ache with both sorrow and relief. Afterward, he found them clean clothes from Noah's old drawers, shirts hanging loose on their small frames, and tucked them into bed on the fold-out couch with Noah's stuffed bear and blanket. That night, as he turned off the lamp, he saw them curl against each other, eyelids drooping in peace, and he thought to himself that maybe, for the first time, they felt safe. Over the next few days, Ethan worked to peel back the walls around their hearts. He learned their names were Lily and Leah, though they said it so softly it was almost a whisper. They rarely spoke, but their eyes spoke volumes, eyes that darted at sudden noises, flinched at shadows, yet slowly began to soften under Ethan's patient kindness. He let them sit in the garden with Noah, who showed them how to chase butterflies and draw with sidewalk chalk, their hesitant smiles slowly replacing fear with something new, hope. Still, shadows lingered. They carried scars not just on their thin arms but deep within, and Ethan began to notice odd details that gnawed at him. Lily had a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder, one so familiar it made his breath catch, because his late wife Anna had carried the same mark. Leah, too, had a way of tilting her head when she listened, just like Anna used to do when Ethan told stories. He brushed the thoughts away as coincidence, yet the unease persisted. At night, when the children were asleep, he would sit alone at the kitchen table, staring at the flickering light, replaying the day at the market and the choice he had made. He hadn't just rescued 2 children from cruelty. Something deeper tied them to him, something he couldn't yet name. But one thing was certain, he had opened his home and his heart, and now, come what may, he was their protector. Ethan's thoughts became restless after noticing the strange familiarity in Lily and Leah, and no matter how much he tried to push the unease aside, it returned with more force each time he looked at them. So one evening after tucking the children into bed, he pulled out his late wife Anna's old photo albums and records, spreading them across the kitchen table as though searching for a missing puzzle piece, and the more he studied the faded pictures, the more the truth tugged at him. Anna had once spoken of a younger sister, Emily, who had drifted out of their lives after a bitter family dispute, and Ethan had never met her, believing she had died years ago overseas, yet now, staring at the twins' delicate features, the curve of their smiles, the way their eyes shimmered with a haunting echo of Anna's, he could no longer dismiss the gnawing suspicion. Determined to uncover answers, he began visiting the town's records office during his lunch breaks, combing through stacks of files and newspaper archives until one afternoon he stumbled across an article nearly buried in the back pages about a woman named Emily Collins who had died under unclear circumstances, leaving behind 2 young daughters whose father had mysteriously disappeared soon after. Ethan's breath caught as the details sank in. Their mother was Anna's sister, which made Lily and Leah his nieces, his own blood. The discovery left him both shaken and furious. Not only had the cruel stepmother abused them, but she had also erased their true family ties, hiding them away like secrets. When Ethan returned home that night, he sat the girls down in the living room, his voice tender yet trembling as he told them what he had found. At first, they stared blankly, as if unable to process, but then Leah's lips quivered and Lily's eyes filled with tears as they whispered broken memories of a kind aunt who once sang lullabies to them, lullabies that matched the very songs Anna had used to hum while rocking Noah to sleep. The connection snapped into place, undeniable and raw, and Ethan felt both grief and relief crashing over him, grief for the years lost to cruelty, relief that fate had somehow brought them back into his life. The girls wept openly, and Ethan pulled them into his arms, his heart aching as he whispered, "You're not alone anymore, your family, my family." That night, long after the children had fallen asleep clinging to one another, Ethan sat in the dark with tears streaming down his face, realizing the weight of what he had uncovered. Saving the twins had not been a random act of compassion, it had been destiny, a thread woven long before he understood it, and though the truth shocked him, it also gave him a renewed purpose. He hadn't just taken in strangers, he had been entrusted with the lives of his wife's nieces, and he vowed then and there to honor that bond with every ounce of strength he had. Once Ethan uncovered the truth of Lily and Leah's parentage, the weight of responsibility pressed heavier on his shoulders, yet alongside it burned a fierce determination to protect them not just as a rescuer but as family, so the very next morning he began the long process of contacting social services, filing paperwork, and gathering every shred of evidence he had uncovered about their abuse and the crimes of their stepmother. The woman, enraged by the fact that her transaction had not ended quietly, tried to strike back by accusing Ethan of kidnapping, but with the documents, the town records, and the testimony of the frightened twins, her lies collapsed in court like a house of cards, and she was sentenced to prison for child endangerment and fraud, her cruel smirk replaced with fury as she was led away in handcuffs. For Lily and Leah, the trial was terrifying, but Ethan never left their side, holding their hands and whispering reassurance, and Noah stood beside them proudly as if to say, "We're a team now." When the adoption papers were finalized, Ethan's heart nearly burst when the judge declared that the twins were officially part of his household, though in truth, they had already become part of his heart long before the ink dried on the documents. Life at home changed in the most unexpected ways. What was once a quiet house with 2 plates at the dinner table grew to 4, then to 5 when Noah insisted on squeezing his chair between his sisters, sharing his crayons, his toys, and even his bed on stormy nights when the twins woke crying from nightmares. Slowly, the scars left by years of neglect began to heal, replaced by laughter echoing through the small kitchen, chalk drawings sprawling across the driveway, and songs sung softly at bedtime, songs that Ethan remembered from Anna and that the girls carried in their bones from their late mother, Emily. The day Lily shyly tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, can you braid my hair?" His throat closed with emotion, and when Leah followed soon after with the same word, "Daddy," he stepped outside to hide the tears that rolled down his cheeks, because in that single word lay all the trust, love, and belonging he had fought to give them. Years later, looking back on that night at the market, Ethan would often marvel at how fate had written a story he could never have imagined, how a desperate act of compassion had led him to his wife's nieces, his own flesh and blood, and how together they rebuilt a family from broken pieces. He had once believed his life had ended the day Anna died, but Lily, Leah, and Noah had shown him that even through grief, love could rise again, stronger, brighter, and more unbreakable than before, and as he watched the 3 children run across the yard under the golden glow of sunset, their laughter ringing like music, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as a rescue had become the greatest blessing of his life. A family reborn from ashes into love.